All right, guys, welcome back to Close Monday, the podcast guiding restaurant entrepreneurs and franchisees through growth and real estate and operational strategy. I'm your host, Kyle and Sarah, and today's guest is Michael Keller, President and CEO of Jeremiah's Italian Ice. You probably know some of the brands that he's been involved with previously, such as one of my personal favorites, I think best mint chocolate chip ice cream on the planet, Baskin Robbins, Jamba Juice, Dairy Queen. But now he's building something equally iconic, in my personal opinion, again, just cooler. Is that safe to say? Since stepping in as CEO in 2023, Michael has led a deliberate franchise-first growth strategy, one that's landed Jeremiah's on the fastest-growing franchise list 3 years in a row. He's here to talk about what it takes to scale without losing the soul of the brand. So I'm really excited to get into this with you, Michael. I'm excited to see you again.
Excited to see you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So we touched on the iconic brands. What was the draw for you with Jeremiah's?
It's a good question. What was the draw? It actually started, what was that? It started with a phone call from someone we both know. Mm-hmm. And once I started talking to this old friend, his name was Cam, he started talking about there's this really cool brand that's growing quickly. It's based in Orlando. And he's like, given your Dairy Queen, Baskin Robbins, Jamba Juice background, would you mind talking to them? Because they're doing Italian ice and they have ice cream. They blend the two together into these really cool things called gelatis. And I was not a current CEO at that moment. I was between gigs. I was doing some other consulting. And I said, yeah, that's interesting. It's kind of my whole background smashed up together and be glad to meet those guys. And that was the original start. I knew very little about what was going on before he made that connection. But to your point, sort of in the intro, it's sort of logical to get to talking to Jeremiah's after you've had the kind of experience that I've had.
Yeah. And that's interesting to go from a consultant sort of into the CEO role. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I'd be glad to talk about that because actually I wouldn't call it obvious at all because what I was consulting had nothing to do with the restaurant industry. And arguably I wasn't even consulting. I was working for a change management consulting firm, supporting the CEO, a brilliant woman who kind of brought me on board to help more with business development and branding. So I was actually not client facing and wasn't supposed to be. The idea was that the work they did was very C-suite level, and I was a former CEO, CMO. So maybe as their head of business development, I would think a lot like and respond a lot like one of their targets would be, so to speak, somebody they were looking to connect with. And so I joined them for a good stretch of time. And wasn't really necessarily looking for anything, but it popped up. Pretty convenient timing because it was sort of right at the beginning of COVID. So I was working on that and a children's book at the same time through the early years of COVID. And so the pivot from that type of consulting and this type of work was almost like dropping one thing, starting another. It would have been very different had I been restaurant consulting and then pivoting into something more formal. Although ironically, with Jeremiah's, I did start as a marketing consultant. Then I was interim president, sort of in a consulting mode from a slightly higher vantage point, seeing more of the organization before it gave way to a CEO role.
Wow. That's not a traditional path, right?
Nope.
Certainly not. And I guess in that whole, while you're making this kind of transition into this role, how do you begin to even get your arms around something, right? It's totally new sort of role and position and responsibilities, but really a whole other world, different language, different processes. Where do you even start with that?
Yeah, it is a lot. It is a lot to take on. I would think for any new senior team member joining an organization, really almost anyone who's going to have a decent amount of breadth in their role, perhaps in this case, like a CEO president. And it absolutely feels like drinking from a fire hose. And I believe that if I had taken some of the other CEO gigs I was looking at before getting back into this, weren't necessarily directly pertaining to industry experience I had before. But, in theory, at a certain level, you're applying business principles, you're applying strategic principles. Maybe it doesn't matter as much. But interestingly here, Kyle, because it's a really good question, because of my former Dairy Queen, Baskin Robbins, Jamba Juice, and even my Kookaroo experience, it was almost like, I think, 7 or 18 years of restaurant industry experience, multi-unit retail, 2.5 of those were franchised. And so in some ways, getting started at Jeremiah's was a relatively fast start. It was I had a quick start guide going for me because so many of the fundamentals of the industries I didn't have to relearn. I had to meet a new team, had to learn a new brand, had to understand our franchisee population. But then at a certain level, I'm still competing in multi-unit retail food service. It's the frozen dessert industry, which I had been in before. There are many distinct differences between franchisees of all brands, but there are also certain franchisee universal truths. So those kind of fell back in place. Of course, I had to meet a whole new team of people and assess talent in the organization. So that's always very new. And you have to go about that very, I think, properly and appropriately in a painstaking way because it's so important.
Mm-hmm.
But I was not as overwhelmed as I thought I might have been had I truly been entering an industry that was more of a lateral move in terms of being a CEO as opposed to progressing something that I had done before.
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly, I mean, the people piece alone is a lot to get your arms around. But I think what you mentioned there, the franchisee universe, I think you said that's so important. And I'm relatively new to the franchise side. I mean, my exposure is really on the real estate piece, and so much focus on our side is put on who's the tenant, what's their credit, et cetera. And I have found working with various different types of franchise groups that sifting through the individual franchisee and their creditworthiness, their financial stability, their overall how they're going to present themselves to the landlord is often not as buttoned up as it should be. But you had kind of put in a new franchisee approval process. So what kind of signals to you like, hey, this group is a good fit or this gal's a good fit? Even if they look great on paper, is there something beyond that you look for?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. That's an excellent compound question. There's a lot in there.
Yeah, I sorry about that. My brain
It's
just keeps
quite all right.
going.
It's quite all right because the franchising industry in the United States, let alone globally, if you look at licensing and things like that, it's massive. And let's just take the United States because it's probably one of the more robust franchising ecosystems in the world, probably, maybe perhaps just given all of the multi-unit retail brands that can exist and non-multi-unit retail brands. There's tons of franchise brands out there that have nothing to do with brick and mortar retail and nothing to do with multi-unit retail. There's so many different kinds. So I think in many ways, the right franchisee is going to vary incredibly by industry and then within industry, even by brand. And I think as a great example here, I really admire Chick-fil-A as an example. They're one of the higher, stronger performers in the QSR, quick service restaurant category. Technically, we're in that category too. We're in the frozen dessert segment of that category, but they're in it as well. Yep. And their average unit volumes are massive, massive. Everybody knows that. They're among the highest in the industry. Wow. Well, those average unit volumes are not what you would find in the frozen dessert industry. It's a very different type of average unit volume. It's also a very different type of business. So another fun example to draw the distinctions here for a brand that's in a business that has a sort of a center of the plate protein, so to speak. The brand is in the business of breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or maybe all three, or maybe some combination of the two. That's not what the frozen dessert industry is about. The frozen dessert industry does not serve breakfast, lunch, or dinner, although some people might have something like a gelati for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, but that's not obviously who we serve. We are an afternoon snack. We are an after lunch or dinner snack on the weekend, an after dinner snack or treat in the evening, and then ultimately maybe a later in the evening destination for people who are doing something after dinner, whether they're out or not. That is a very different day part. And in many ways, therefore, there are many different business mechanics that are behind that reality. And one of the business mechanics behind that reality is average unit volumes, which in the frozen dessert industry are lower than a Chick-fil-A or like a McDonald's. And even speaking of McDonald's to this point, which you'll totally understand, this is totally up your alley. McDonald's is, of course, in the hamburger, French fry, Diet Coke or Coke business. But for those of us who really know McDonald's, well, we understand that McDonald's more than anything is in the real estate business. And so too are in many ways the franchisees that are operating their locations. They're aware of that business model that they're in. And those businesses are very different from ours. And so we attract a different type of franchisee than ones that might operate a McDonald's or a Chick-fil-A. And I think in general, we tend to attract ones that are a little bit more I would say earlier in their entrepreneurial phase. I would imagine McDonald's and Chick-fil-A franchisees are quite entrepreneurial too, but they're pretty advanced at this point in terms of where they are owning multi-million-dollar businesses and likely owning multiple units of multi-million-dollar businesses. Our franchisees tend to be starting out more on their franchising journey or on their entrepreneurship journey. And given the average unit volumes, we tend to attract franchisees who are just kind of getting started in that area. In general, we also have some very sophisticated operators too who have done things like Marco's Pizza and Subways and Chick-fil-A's as well, many others. But in general, tends to be a little bit more that way. So we deal with men and women who are getting started. Maybe this will be their first ever franchise experience. Maybe this will be their first ever multi-unit retail food service experience. And so it really changes things. And to bring that now to another part of the question you asked, it also changes the kind of person you are looking to recruit. Right? You don't necessarily need to have the same net worth and the same liquidity to operate a frozen dessert concept as you might a McDonald's or a Chick-fil-A.
Right.
They're just very different businesses with much larger capital investments required of one than the other. So the whole economics are going to be different. Probably neither's better nor worse. They're just different, and you have to understand the difference. Also, for us, and this is where it gets more interesting, like tell you something you don't know. This is where it gets a little bit more interesting, which is if you're looking for franchisees who are, or if you know you're looking at franchisees who are just kind of starting down their entrepreneurial, maybe franchising path,
Hmm.
and one of the things that we have started talking to each other about looking for is some confidence in their resiliency.
Yeah.
Because if it's their first time in a business like this,
Mhm.
and specifically in the frozen dessert industry, which is tricky, let alone the seasonality of the industry, you need somebody who, if they haven't had a chance to exhibit resiliency in previous roles that they've been in, even corporate jobs that they've been in, we need to tease that out because it's no
Yeah.
easy ride, right? Multi-unit retail food service is not an easy ride. Franchising is not an easy ride. Competing in a hyper competitive industry. In our case, we got Dairy Queen and Baskin Robbins, and we've got Rita's, and we've got big players who are arguably also in our world, like a Dunkin' Donuts, who serve things that cross over into our world.
Hmm.
We just have a lot of big competitors swirling around us. So this is not for the lighthearted. And sometimes it could go very well, lines out the door,
Hmm.
after dinner on a warm Thursday, Friday, Saturday evening. And then there's like January 8th, right? You're in the middle of the
Yeah.
winter and you're in
Yeah. Yeah.
North Carolina and you're a franchisee of a frozen dessert concept. You better be resilient, right?
Right.
And plus, as we all know, things are going to happen. Supply chain is going to get weird.
Yeah.
Economy is going to get weird. Competitors are going to do unusual things you didn't expect. So one of the things we are increasingly looking for, Kyle, in addition to a lot of the basics of having experience that is relevant to our industry, is we try to get at, as best we can, our perception of how resilient um, a franchisee or a franchisee group or a family or a group of partners are likely to be, because that might
Mhm.
significantly help determine their successful outcome.
For sure. I mean, I think the expectation part of that too, right? Like, I think people hear like it's going to be a seasonal business, but it's really, if you haven't experienced something like it, like a downturn in your income, or like you said, in some sort of corporate role, you can't really describe how you're going to have to maybe adjust staff or adjust your ordering or adjust your pay in some cases for some of these guys, I'm sure. So that's a great point. And I always think about that when I look at some of these guys, and they're eager to hit the streets. They want to get their store open. They want to get this done. And I'm always thinking, because I was in the restaurant business for a long time and I have to keep my mouth shut. And I just, okay, are you doing all this? So I'm kind of teasing it out myself. Like, hey, did you hire an architect yet, or a contractor? Have you spoken to
Right.
the, corporate team yet? So, no, that's a great point. I want to go back to what you had said about the team, building the team over there. I think I read somewhere that you had brought in some folks from like a Sonic, so maybe some
Mhm.
Darden folks. How do you, I guess, same kind of question, but as it pertains to team, how do you build that executive team when you're in a growth mode like that? Because you're kind of like building the hammer and the house at the same time, right?
Yeah, very true. And not easy. And probably anybody that's listening to your podcast who spent any amount of time in business, including yourself, hiring is hard.
Mm-hmm.
And the odds that you will succeed in it all the time are pretty low. And my
Mm-hmm.
guess is that everybody that's now listening to you and I talk probably can remember, maybe even relatively recently, when they were really excited about a hire that didn't work out. And so this is the 10th company I've worked at. I've been in a senior role for probably in 6 or 7 of them, maybe 8. Can't remember fully, doesn't matter. But I probably have up and down experiences related to hiring great talent and all of the above. And yet you still have to do it. So there's a little
Yeah.
bit of a rolling of the dice. It's a speed dating thing, to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
We can't have apprenticeships. We don't have long consulting gigs where you get to find out who somebody is and how they work before you get to hire them. And in our case, in the franchising space, as you know firsthand, speed is really important. And as I shared with our franchisee population early on in my time at Jeremiah's, one of the things that I was hoping to bring to Jeremiah's as someone who had multi-unit retail food service branding and franchisor relations background at Dairy Queen and Baskin Robbins in particular, is to help Jeremiah's grow into the franchisor it needed to be to support its new franchising business. Some of that, to your exact question, Kyle, would mean leveling up in talent. And it would be great if you could just okay, level up in talent. Let's go find the best people we possibly can. Well, that's a great concept, except it's a small company and we're kind of
Yeah.
in startup-ish mode.
Yeah.
So we also have to carefully watch cash. So it'd be really
Mm-hmm.
nice to start throwing money around to some of the most visible, talented, incredibly well set up or great track recorded people in our system or in our industry, excuse me. But it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work that way. I needed people who lived in Orlando because I couldn't relocate them. I needed
Mm-hmm.
people who were ready to jump. I needed people who looked like they had a lot of potential experience and potential, but also people that Jeremiah's could afford because we were a small-ish
Yeah.
company still growing. And so all of those things had to be balanced with, very importantly, as might fully suspect, not only did they have to be balanced with a good chemistry fit within the Jeremiah's team, they also had to be a good chemistry fit with the Jeremiah's franchise community. That
Hmm.
didn't have to be perfect, so to speak, but there definitely had to be a sensitivity to an
Yeah.
understanding of how you work with franchisees and franchisee leaders because they're our customers, right? More than
Yep.
anything, we're in the B2C business of marketing the brand to the consumer, and we're in the B2B business of marketing all of our ideas and everything else that we need to do to go to market through our franchisee leaders. So it's hard. And I would say that the starting point is usually objectives and strategy. What are we trying to do with the brand and the business? Both objectively speaking, maybe longer term, 3 to 5 years, 5 to 7 years. Then strategically, what's happening in the next year or two where we need some talent to help us get from one level to the next. And out of that usually pops out some pretty, I wouldn't call them apparent, but maybe readily apparent opportunities that the company might have, like gaps that it needs to fill. You nailed one already when you made an earlier mention. R&D was one. Here's Jeremiah's with this great brand and this great menu, but nobody in R&D to really help optimize the menu, let alone help us compete against Dairy Queen, Baskin Robbins, Sonic, Ben & Jerry's, Haagen-Dazs, Brewster's, you name it,
Yeah.
right? You can't just guess at what might work. You need to start doing the hard work that leads to the consumer insights, doing the hard food science work that leads to cost optimized products that can be launched into a system to help make our franchisees profitable when they're out there, right? That requires an R&D professional, and indeed had a great opportunity to bring over a woman from Sonic who became our director of R&D. Her name is Erin. And so all this Sonic experience was packed into Erin as she comes in. And ironically, Erin and I almost competed against each other when I was at Dairy Queen and she was at Sonic, without knowing it. We weren't
Right.
competing directly, but I was responsible for R&D at Dairy Queen as well. And she was in
Interesting.
R&D at Sonic, and Dairy Queen and Sonic were head-to-head competitors for
Right.
sure.
Right. Yeah.
So we started swapping war stories when we first met each other about what it
That's
was like to
interesting.
be competing against each other. Now here we were on the same team, which I thought was cool.
That's like
One other thing
you
I'd like
just
to
read
add to
something.
that, Kyle, because it's an interesting question. At first, we needed an influx of some high energy talent that was
Hmm.
consistent with culture. Now, though, 2.5 years later, Kyle, I've had the chance to see where we've struggled in a couple of areas. Some of the more longitudinal struggles that the brand and business have had to either get it right within our
Hmm.
own four walls or to really help our franchisees be successful the way we need them to be. And most recently, I've made with my teammates a couple of unusual hires. It almost feels like a trend, but I don't know if it actually is a trend. I hired a fractional CFO, a full time
Mm.
supply chain leader, and a full time director of franchise sales who were all in their early to mid 60s. Yes,
Okay.
I was waiting for your eyebrows to go off because Jeremiah's, the average age of a Jeremiah Support Center employee might have been
Hmm.
30 if we were lucky. I was the oldest
Yeah.
one
Right.
at Jeremiah's when I arrived there. It's a young
Yeah. Yeah.
company.
I noted
And
that. Yeah.
you kind of want to hold on to that culture, a young company serving its
Hmm.
franchisees. There's a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of passion, all critical. But sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And
Right.
sometimes you need an industry veteran with all that experience to bring that experience into the company and also serve as like a player coach. And so after a series of
Exactly.
hires of maybe sub 40 somethings that looked like the trend, more recently the trend has been early to mid 60 somethings to bring their experience into Jeremiah's to help us go to where we need to go to. Really interesting. Never
That
thought it
is
would
interesting,
happen and kind of glad it did.
but fully intentional.
Fully intentional.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier. Like when you're in growth mode, you kind of need people who get it. So the player coach analogy resonates with me for sure. You need well, who's the last player coach? Pete Rose? Oh, was he a player coach? I think
Yeah,
a
that's a
controversial
good
one.
question. It's got to be like a quarterback or something also, right? It's got to be
Oh,
something like that in there.
yeah, yeah. But that resonates with me. So yeah, so you and I have worked briefly together for a little bit of time, and I have to say, if I've never said to you before, I really admire your leadership style, particularly in that meeting that we had the last time we met, and I can tell that you really value feedback and clearly diverse perspectives from different people. I'm curious in that, and definitely with the new hires that you just mentioned, through all this listening that you do, whether directly or indirectly, has any of it created like a major course, like a shift change, like change of direction, of any kind of major decision or direction that the company was going, and now it moved in a different way?
Yeah, like paused because very insightful question, and I want to make sure I answer it as head
Yeah.
on as possible because I was thinking, is there like one or two decisions that got made that really jump out as well? We could have gone left or gone right, but we went right because of the types of conversation that we had.
Yeah.
And
I mean, kind of like
maybe
you hear
while I'm
somebody say something and you're like, Like I never thought of that. That's an
Yeah, well,
interesting way
I'll tell you.
to go.
So yes and no. Let me answer it that
Mhm.
way. Yes and no. Generally, I don't think the answer is yes because maybe per the style reference you just made, at least to me, there's so many different kinds of senior leaders. At least for me, the way I hire and the way I build a team, and again, I think it's just unique to me. I'm not saying it's better, it's just different, maybe unique in this way. I find it very important to hear the perspectives of multiple individuals, functional perspectives. Some of them have different age experiences. Boomers think differently than Xers that think different from millennials that think
Oh,
differently
sure.
from Z. And I feel like I need to hear that. Men think differently from women. People whose lived experiences are different than others, people of color versus not, they have a different perspective as well. I feel like my job is to synthesize. My job is to hear those things and figure out how to synthesize that into a point of view so that we just don't go on talking about something forever or wander around in the wilderness, all this talk and no action, because the action is very important. So I feel like it's one of my jobs is to synthesize. So I feel like decisions get better when there are multiple voices or multiple brains involved in that, probably up to a point. At some point, there's probably too many cooks in the kitchen, right?
Hmm.
That's where that expression comes from. But I generally feel like a group of people making decisions is going to be better than any single decision I'm going to make. I feel
Hmm.
very comfortable saying that. So I think that guides a lot of things. But Kyle, to your question, actually, relatively recently, I heard something that one of my new teammates said that was, every once in a while, just looking for that phrase or turn of a phrase. We're like, wow, that captures something I've been struggling with or thinking about. And that's a really succinct way of describing something. And it happened to be a new teammate that we brought on to run our supply chain. He had been the president of Cisco Central Florida, one of the
Oh.
distribution facilities, for a long time. This is a very senior executive at Cisco. He had also run Kiki's supply chain for them, sort of third party, and through Cisco as well. So he had all these decades worth of experience at Cisco. And we've been with Cisco for over 3 years. And we've been trying to figure out how to optimize a wide variety of supply chain things with Cisco. And it's not easy. We're small regional Jeremiahs. They're national, arguably the largest food service distributor in the United States, North America, or even the world. How does little Jeremiah's influence big old Cisco? And believe me, we were trying, as you probably even remember a few things you heard about how hard we were trying. Well,
Hmm.
we'll never stop trying. But one of the things my relatively new teammate said that, to your point, was like, heard that once in a conversation. I'm like, yep,
Right, right.
that's probably it right there. He's like, look, Cisco's a huge company. You're not going to get Cisco to behave differently per se. What you need to do is figure out how you can alter the way you are behaving so it fits into Cisco's model so you can take advantage of their scale, take advantage of their systems, take advantage of their processes, the things that are going right. Are things going to go wrong on supply chain from time to time? Yes, they will.
Hmm.
But what you're probably better off doing is set yourself up so that Cisco can like easily digest you as
Hmm.
opposed to making it difficult for Cisco to work with you.
Yeah.
And that whole idea of taking our round peg and putting it into Cisco's square hole and the idea of getting as square as we could to fit inside Cisco Square. Now I feel like I see something, like literally see
Hmm.
something in my mind's eye about all the different ways we might need to shape our supply chain decision making to better fit into the Cisco model so we can be more successful for our franchisees. So there
Right.
is an example of listening to somebody who has more experience than I do on supply chain. I'm a
Hmm.
former chief marketing officer, a lot of supply chain experience. I've
Right,
never run supply chain. This guy has run supply chain. It seems like I should listen to him when he's
right.
talking about, or else why did I hire him? Right.
Yeah, right.
So I think that answers your question with that last anecdote,
Yeah.
particularly.
I I guess I don't know how much you can tell me, but I guess where my head goes is fitting the Cisco's ecosystem to me sounds like, as a former operator, is like you need to spend more money. But I'm guessing that obviously doesn't work, right? That's too easy. So is it like like logistically, like you have to order more or bundle things differently or structure ordering differently? Is there anything that you can tell us that's like worked specifically for Cisco that made this easier to digest for them?
That's a great question. Some things, absolutely not.
Never ever.
Never.
Yeah.
But a few things, yes. I feel like one in particular pops to mind. And right before I share that, I'll just say this more broadly. And you would know this in spades from all your time in the restaurant industry. Restaurant industry distribution is really complex. There are a lot of moving parts. And even for little old Jeremiah's at
Hmm.
175 stores and growing, we're in 11 states. We pull from 18 of Cisco's, what we call OPCOs, operating companies. They might call them op sites. We call them OPCOs.
Hmm.
and those pulled from 2 Cisco central warehouses. And so now we have 20 points of distribution with Cisco. And that's before you even start to add in all the vendors that supply the central warehouses or the opcos, and all the 175 to 185 eventually franchisees who are receiving on the other end. So we're talking about 250 to 300 points of distribution in this little
Yeah.
system, right? Called the Jeremiah's, called supply chain ecosystem. And virtually everything has to go right for product to get itself from manufacturer into store at the right time. So
Yeah.
you can imagine there are a lot of systems, there are a lot of processes, there are a lot of screens, there are a lot of reports, there are a lot of forms that have to all fall into place at just the right time to all make it work. I remember being a very small, when I was CEO of a candy company before this one, small candy company, but with a couple brands that were national or quasi-national. We needed to get into Walmart and we needed to be in Dollar General as example. And oh my gosh, setting up our small little company and our brands in these giant companies' distribution systems was months of work, a lot to get right. But one thing I'd like to share with you that again was a very cool soundbite that made sense too, because only a former senior Cisco executive might be able to give you insight to this about how things work. He's like, look, not saying this is hard and fast, but generally speaking, not Costco, excuse me, Cisco is, they kind of work on a weekly rhythm. They look at reports weekly. Many of the reports are based on weekly movement of cases. They're maybe looking at their customers' weekly performance, their own weekly performance, things that are happening from a forecasting or an order cycle standpoint are happening weekly. It's like everything begins and ends with the week. And Jeremiah's, you're trying, given your size, which makes sense at the start, you're trying to manage Costco again. You're trying to manage Cisco monthly. So you're like, it's like Jeremiah's is from Venus and Cisco's from Mars
Yeah.
type of situation. We were almost talking different languages. And one of the things he's encouraged us to do, which we could easily do, it wasn't like it even was a hard thing, was to start thinking about operating more in a week in, week out mindset. So that when we're talking with our Cisco teammates who are in a week in, week out mindset, that we are a little bit more culturally aligned with them in terms of how that
Yeah.
big system of theirs works. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah.
That now we're not even talking mentality or talking business strategy. We're talking about how you use the calendar, right? And maybe a difference between a Cisco culture and a Jeremiah's culture around calendar management. I thought that was very interesting and also easy enough for us to shave a little bit of our circle to get to a square to fit into that mode. If that's the way they work, we can figure out how to get there.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like an easier shift than anything, but also I can imagine it's a tremendous help to them on their side if you're working that way, because if they have to stop everything they're doing and shift for you, then they're like, here comes that Jeremiah's order again, right? And that's obviously not an ideal way to have a fruitful relationship. Um, I want to talk about your background in marketing some of these other dessert brands and what you've got going now with Jeremiah. So you've marketed like the dessert that like blew my mind as a kid, the Blizzard, Jamba Juice, and now you're kind of bringing these hop away treats to Jeremiah's. Talk about that. I mean, is this something that is it's got a lot of hype behind it? It's definitely not like an LTO, right? It's like a long-term brand type of deal. So what goes into that?
Yeah, cool question. A lot goes into it, as you might imagine, because it's definitely not an LTO. Entering
Mm-hmm.
into the ice cream cake business for Jeremiah's is a multi-year process, not just a multi-year process, generally speaking, but a multi-year process to enter into the business. Right?
Mm-hmm.
People like Dairy Queen, Baskin Robbins, as two excellent examples, both brands that I've worked for, have been in the ice cream cake business for decades upon decades upon decades. Right? So little old Jeremiah is getting started in ice cream cakes. We've just dipped our toe in the water. We've got years and years and years to go. So to your point, this is not an LTO. And one of the things we had to talk to our franchisees about, and still are every day, is you can't think of this like an LTO.
Yeah.
This is absolutely a menu extension. It's a different use case for our customers. But more than that, franchisees, please think of it as entering into a new business. It's
Mm-hmm.
almost like for our franchisees, they have to put themselves back in the mindset of when they were getting ready to open their first store and everything they had to do to get ready to open that first store and to introduce themselves to the community in every imaginable way. What is Jeremiah's Italian Ice? What is the product? What's our guest experience about? How do we fit from a value equation standpoint? So many things. It's almost like our franchisees have to do that again as they enter into this new
Oh
business. So
yeah. Mm-hmm.
that's interesting all by itself. And for me, definitely not a no-brainer. Nothing is a no-brainer.
Mm-hmm.
However, what we did know was that our loyal customers who loved Italian Ice, loved our gelatis, which are Italian ice layered with soft ice cream,
So good. Yeah.
they had to go to our competitors to buy ice cream cakes, right? If you're a
Mm-hmm.
family that loves ice cream cakes, you might love Jeremiah's to the end of your days. Like your kids
Mm-hmm.
might be just so into Scoop Froggy Frog that it's hard to even describe. But when it comes to an ice cream cake for a birthday or for Valentine's Day or Mother's Day or Father's Day, our customers had to go to our competitors because we didn't sell ice cream cakes. And as a former Dairy Queen Baskin Robbins employee who lived the ice cream cake wars with Dairy Queen and Baskin Robbins franchisees battling everyone else we had to battle, it felt like a shame that we were sending our customers to our competitors. And that was one of the inspirations for getting started. And we really wanted to help our franchisees grow, increase their sales, increase their profitability. And it's not always easy, like to find a product here or a product there that could do that. But sometimes a menu extension, and in this case, a pretty significant one, really seemed like the right idea at that time, which was about a year and a half ago now, to get that started. And so here we are, 6 weeks into the launch. We're off to a really nice start. I'm not even going to say we have 6 months left to go. It's like we have 6 years left to go, right, to really drive this to where we want to.
And that's, I mean, just so I think the audience understands, I mean, these are cakes that are treats that are made on site. So this is adding what was kind of, they were in sort of like the Cisco thing. They're in their routine of making the Italian ices and doing all this. Now it's like, hey, we also got to make these cakes and stuff. I mean, that's a big sort of shift in how they operate. And for franchisees who have this mindset of wanting to be in a system like that, have there been many challenges or maybe even like some reluctance on implementing by these franchisees?
Absolutely. I think you're spot on. Many of our franchisees, not all, but many, chose Jeremiah's as their franchisor of choice, in part because they really enjoyed the simplicity of our operation. We have one of the simpler menus and one of the easier menus to execute in our industry. And some of them with former restaurant experience could easily tell the difference. And even those who are shopping around looking for franchise concepts that could get into could also tell the difference. And we hear all the time in our discovery days, one of the things that has drawn people to Jeremiah's is ease of execution. And that's not an accident. We've worked very hard to make it as operationally simple as possible. So then to your point, along comes cakes. Pausing on that though, Erin and I, this woman who came from Sonic, we spent a lot of time talking about this. And it's like, look, if we're going to get Jeremiah's into the ice cream cake business, knowing who our franchisees are and knowing what some of the challenges are in the ice cream cake business, in particular, hiring, training, and retaining cake decorators to make these awesome looking cakes, we can't put that burden on these franchisees. We will drive them nuts and they will chase us out of town, and they'd have every right to. So what we have to do, Erin is her name. What we have to do, Erin, is we have to figure out how to make the most operationally simple ice cream cakes possible. And basically what she came up with was taking a large gelati and turning it sideways and making it in a box. So rather than our franchisees making a large gelati in a cup, they just had to make a large gelati in a box. And so kind of the cake in the box idea was born. And rather than at Dairy Queen or Baskin Robbins, where there are cake domes and cake boards and tented cake boxes and things that slid around inside the packaging, we went straight into making the product right in the packaging. And so once frozen, it became a really easily taken home, really easily delivered. We even are calling it the world's most deliverable ice cream cake because it's a piece of cake for DoorDash to pick up an ice cream cake and deliver it to a home. And the pun was very much intended there. And DoorDash actually believed in it so much, they made a very large investment in our business over the course of the summer to help us get into the business because they saw how relevant this product was to their delivery business. In some ways, we cracked part of the code by making a cake product that could really travel well from store where it's fresh made to home without having to over worry about the condition of the product when it arrives, which is really important. When you're in the ice cream cake business, you really want your product to look great at the other end. Feel good about it maybe when mom or dad picks it up. You're a little worried about it when a third party picks it up. What's going to happen? And a cake in the box is part of the solution.
One of my clients is Cold Stone Creamery, and they have had tremendous success with their cakes.
Yes, they have.
To your point earlier, it's work, significant amount of work to put those types of decorations together. They can customize them on sites. Yeah, it's not easy, but I know it has been a tremendous boost for them. I don't even know when they implemented, but ice cream. We just had a birthday party for my niece. Ice cream cake. It was a no-brainer, right? Now that was it. We had to go where we get it. We actually went to Baskin Robbins. Sorry to say that.
Oh, that hurts.
It was the closest one. That's the only one that we have. We're on the east end of Long Island. There's nothing out there.
No Jeremiah's for now. That's right.
No Jeremiah's out there.
Yes.
So I want to real estate. This is a leading question because I probably already spoken to you. I might even know the answer. But we have this one little segment called Real Estate Check-In. And I
Yes.
know that a lot of our conversation was about helping franchisees narrow down sites based on a lot of different factors that you've outlined, and we don't need to get into all the details. But how do you today make sure that every Jeremiah's location is set up for success? I mean, markets are different, franchisees are different, co-tenancy is different. Is there something that you actively are trying to implement or avoid when dealing with real estate for these groups?
Yeah, another insightful question. Appreciate you asking it. And I'm going to keep confidential a few things that we do and
Mm-hmm.
decide, but I definitely feel like I can share a couple things that certainly interesting to you, given your background, but also to your listeners. Hopefully, it makes sense too. And this kind of brings us back to actually where we started when we started talking about our franchisees and who they are, what business they're entering, and how we compare to a Chick-fil-A or a McDonald's or something like that. Because when you're in the frozen treat industry, your average unit volumes are different.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't choose real estate that a Chick-fil-A or a McDonald's can hold down when your average unit volumes are lower.
Oh
And
yeah.
so we have to marry the expected average unit volume of multi-unit retail food service frozen dessert player like ourselves with what's available in the marketplace. And I would love to
Mm-hmm.
say that we get freestanding pads in amazing shopping centers with massive square footage and these incredible drive-throughs. That's just not how it works. It might work here and there in certain markets, and we have some franchisees who actually been very successful at that, but those are a little more unicorn-like. More than anything, to answer your question relatively specifically now, one of the things that we're trying super hard to do is pay as close attention as we can to the fundamental economics that drive good real estate decisions in the franchising industry. So we know we've got to get a certain return on investment for our franchisees. We know that we have that can be maybe best expressed by a sales to investment ratio in what they might be expected to do sales wise and what they're going to invest all in to build out a location.
Mm-hmm.
We also know how important the rent factor is going to be once they start operating the restaurant, because if the rent factor is too high, it'll chew into operating margin, which will ultimately affect their profitability and make it harder for them to reach an ROI. So we've been talking a lot in the last 6, 8 months about how all these things intersect, and we're
Mm-hmm.
doing the best job we can using some technology to help us evaluate potential sales potential in any given location, and then not just stopping there, but then taking that into some models that have been built for us that have been very helpful to help us understand, okay, well, at that potential volume, what might a theoretical store with a theoretical P&L look like in that location? So then we could start to look at important return metrics for the franchisee if they were operating there. Then it's our job to share that feedback back with either franchisees, or in our case, we also have area representatives who recruit their own franchisees. And this is where it's funky, as you know, in franchising. We actually are not in a position to literally accept or deny sites. Some would say
Right.
we could literally deny, but that's not the approach we take.
All right.
In many ways, it's a business decision that area representatives and or franchisees have to make. We provide feedback on what we believe might be true about what we're seeing, make them sure that they're as clear as they can be on the feedback they're receiving from us before they make those decisions. So far, it feels like that process is going well. We give them at least 2 opportunities to have their sites reviewed by us. We're
Mm-hmm.
using all that technology I referred to. And something we did this winter that I think was very helpful to us is we deeply involved a bunch of franchisee leaders in the process of helping us understand what, from their perspective, are the most important site attributes that they look for as franchisee leaders that lead
Yeah.
in their markets to the best possible site outcomes. And we had 3 consecutive 2-hour listening sessions and kind of discussion sessions to ultimately lead to a pretty hefty list of these site attributes. And then we started working with a couple of our technology partners to help us winnow that list down to things that did indeed look like they were correlated to Jeremiah's success. And now we've kind
Mm-hmm.
of built a model around that, and around that has a lot to do with the feedback we received from franchisees about what they
Yeah.
believe led to their own success, and then we tried to quantify it so then we could get into these return metrics. Because maybe I'm being a bit nerdy, maybe I'm being a bit too left-brained. It's possible, especially for the real estate industry, but it feels really important to help our franchisees get on the fastest path toward profitability and return on investment, if they're especially if they're a new franchisee that's relatively inexperienced, if we want to see
Yeah.
them continue to grow, because they're
Yeah.
only going to choose to grow if they're generating an ROI from their investment. So it
Right.
feels like a relatively left-brained approach with a little bit of maybe magic and a little bit of art thrown into it feels like where we're at right now.
Yeah, but I mean, there's it has to be about making money at some point, right? Like, it can't just be vibes and great menu. There's, as you know, there's no menu that's gonna buy you out of a a bad lease. I
No way.
think that's the thing is everybody wants to be in the Whole Foods anchored center with, this great co-tenancy and affluent demographics, but, how can you afford it? As in,
Correct.
it's astonishing to me how many franchisees don't think about it that way. And you start to run the numbers backwards through some of the math that you mentioned, and it's clearly no. And like, especially when you have 3% year over year increases, how are they going to handle that? And I think that piece I have found in work with multiple different groups is often, I had a franchisee of a different group today asked me today, what's an AUV? Yeah. So I'm like, wow, dude, okay, let's go get a cup of coffee. Let's
Right.
talk about what we're getting into here because, yeah, somebody turned out. I know it's new, but like, yeah, they're not gonna, 3 years in and they're buried in this. They're not gonna get out of it. And that's unfortunate. So I think that approach is smart. It is left brain, but you need to have it at some point. All right. So wrapping up here, I have a couple questions, quick fire, short answers,
Okay.
top of the head. Whatever your reaction is, just throw it at me. There is no wrong answer.
All right. Fire away.
Okay. All right. First one. Daily, let's say routine or practice that kind of helps to keep you sharp and focused.
And I can't say TikTok, can I?
If that's it. It would be a first. It would be a first for sure. It could be, we give some of you guys cold plunge, journaling, those type of things. And anything for you that's consistent?
Yeah. So a couple thoughts. I think one thing for sure, and I wouldn't say I do it every day, but doing it enough. I am 60, so maybe if I was doing it every day, maybe it would be a bit too much. But there's no doubt got to keep a little balance in my life with fitness related activities, especially given how much I'm on a plane. Now, I won't sit here all high-minded and say the things that I do help me keep my mind clear. I think my best thoughts, who the heck knows? But I do know I'd probably go crazy and probably would wither if I wasn't also moving my body in addition to having my mind being challenged all the time by the challenges that we're facing. So I think that's an important balancing act for sure. And I would say a modicum of reading. I'm not a heavy reader. I wouldn't pretend to be. It's not like I devour books or anything like that. And I don't even read necessarily a lot of business nonfiction, but I am reading a lot of nonfiction right now that kind of has more to do with things like history or knowledge, broader things that affect kind of who we are as human beings that we don't necessarily see, but definitely have shaped us. I feel like broader context things help sharpen my mind as it relates to seeking context for what's happening around Jeremiah's, because it's never just like the one thing you're looking at. It's always something going on around you also. And I think that helps.
Yeah, I agree with both of those. I think for me, definitely some sort of fitness and something outside of all this, because it just kind of feels like it creates more bandwidth in your brain. Like it gives your brain a break for a second. So I'm with you on that one. How about most overlooked KPI in franchising?
Most overlooked KPI in franchising.
Or most underrated, maybe, is a better way
Yeah,
to say
so
it.
I don't even know if there is a KPI for this, and it would be almost underrated by definition if there isn't one. But I would call it franchisee satisfaction, and I would imagine some large franchisors absolutely measure it. I've worked for many franchisors, at least at the time, who didn't measure that. So I'm on my fourth brand now that's had franchisees, and I can safely say that was not being measured. And then you almost start to look for proxies for it. And I'll share an interesting example with you that's very important, and I don't think is giving away much at all. And it takes us back to supply chain for a moment. I think franchisees have every right to be frustrated with supply chain disruptions because it can disrupt their business. There's also a balance in there. It's like people run supply chains, people make mistakes. Mistakes are going to happen in supply chain. So you also have to be a little resilient too, because they're going to happen. At Jeremiah's, we've had more than our fair share of supply chain related challenges as we've grown so rapidly out of Florida into 11 states with Cisco. And so we have an email, supplychain@jeremiahsice.com, where we ask our franchisees to send in issues that they're having. I'm out of this, I need that, what's happening with that. And when we're having supply chain challenges, you see a rise in volume on supplychain@jeremiahsice.com. When we are doing pretty well, you see a reduction in volume on supplychain@jeremiahsice.com. So it's not exactly a KPI, but you can almost measure the agitation in the Jeremiah's franchisee community by how active they feel like they have to be on supplychain@jeremiahsice.com to share with us problems that they're having. Now, that's not a KPI per se, but if you're paying attention, your franchisees are telling you how they're feeling by using a tool you've set up for them. And if you're paying attention, you're picking up what they're laying down. And that's an interesting way to approach it. And I think that's an underrated KPI in a big way.
Yeah, and those supply chain issues will set people off. That'll ruin their whole day, right? Like they're out on something. It can kind of screw things up. So I can imagine your inbox gets lit up with stuff like that when things go a little bit screwy.
Yes, that's very true.
A little more of a lighthearted question. What The favorite flavor, the most underrated Jeremiah's Italian ice flavor. What's one that's kind of like I can't believe people don't know. Well, why are we not saying this is the best one? Is there one that sticks out for you?
Totally, and it does for generational reasons because I just love it so much. I cannot believe others don't. And then when I hear people talk about it the way they do, I'm like, who are you? And also, how old are you? So this is a great example. The moment I say it, you're going to be like, yep. Well, I grew up absolutely loving root beer floats.
Oh,
To me,
yeah.
it's one of the all-time great treats. A root beer float and a Philadelphia cheesesteak is like all I need to
Oh, dude,
survive, right?
for sure.
Right, exactly. So when I showed up at Jeremiah's, I was like, I got to try our root beer. And then I got to try our root beer Italian ice in combination with our vanilla sauce or ice cream layered as a gelati. I have
Yeah.
to, right? So the very first gelati I had was a root beer gelati, and it was basically like eating an ice cream float. And I was like, this is the best thing I've ever tasted in my life. And then so I then started asking my teammates, where does this thing rank? Where is it in the flavor rankings? And I was not at all happy with where it ranked. Now it ranks well enough to be on the menu, but it's not like it's in our top 10 or anything. So I
Yeah.
think it's greatly underrated. And I think Gen Alpha, Gen Z, even millennials, they need to wake up to root beer floats
Yeah.
and start putting down root beer gelatis. That's my belief.
I'm with you on that. I remember someone telling me like, oh, that root beer is kind of like very much like an acquired taste. And I was like, what? To me, it was like such a staple of my youth. And
Right.
I mentioned mint chocolate chip earlier, but I ordered it when we were out with family, a bunch of kids and all the aunts and uncles and stuff. And I ordered mint chocolate chip and my sister-in-law looked at me and goes, how old are you? That's like the old man ice cream. I'm like, what? Since when? I don't know. Is that a thing? I've never heard that before. But she was like, it's the old. Why wouldn't you just get rum raisin or butter pecan? I'm like, no, those are the
Like
old man
Rocky
ice cream
Road or
to me.
something, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I felt targeted on that one. Last question. Okay,
Okay.
this is a little hard hitting, so if you don't want to answer, I totally get it. When does Jet the Gerbil get his own flavor?
Wow. Yeah. Hopefully, Jet the Gerbil has never turned into a flavor.
Yeah, not directly. Yeah,
Yeah, not directly. And maybe he'd have to get a lot more famous first. Jet the Gerbil would probably have to have a really successful sequel that launches a movie. And then once the movie's launched, then Jet the Gerbil could get his own flavor.
Now that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, he needs to get on TikTok. He's the one that we need on TikTok for sure.
Exactly.
Well, awesome. Thank you for the time. I don't want to keep you too much longer. I appreciate reconnecting. I appreciate your candor and sharing all your stories here. I do miss Jeremiah's Italian Nights. Like I always think of the pumpkin one was the last one I was down there. It was astonishing. Like, it was. I think about it every time I read Jeremiah's Italian Nights or Jeremiah. That's what comes to my mind immediately.
And
So
we are literally on the cusp of offering that to our guests in 2025. We just shipped it all to our stores. Supply chain is done with its work. Now it's up to our franchisees to serve it up to our customers. So here we go.
That's awesome. Any final thoughts you want to leave with the listeners? This is your place to do whatever you like.
No, I appreciate your questions. I hope that some of my responses were helpful for folks that are listening. If they're restaurant people like us, I tried to answer the questions in a way that might be thought-provoking to them. And if you ever want to talk about any of these things further, I'd be glad to come back and chat with you and your listeners one more time. It was great seeing you again.
Yeah, we're working on a roundtable, so I'd love to have you on part of that. It'd be a fantastic thing. And if you guys are interested in franchising with Jeremiah's, I will get the contact information from you. We'll put in the show notes. So guys, check them out. A fantastic brand with fantastic leadership down in South Florida. And maybe we'll make their way up here to New York one day. And we'll be ready for that. But thank you again, Michael. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Kyle. Take it easy.
All right.